February 17th, 1903. Paris. Dear Sir, your letter reached me only a few days ago. I want to thank you for its great and welcome trust. I can hardly say more. I cannot go into the quality of your verses, for I am far too removed from every kind of critical intention. Most events are unutterable, consummating themselves in a sphere where word has never trod, and more unutterable than them all are works of art, whose life endures by the side of our own that passes away. So, Letters to a Young Poet by Rilke is the whole topic of today's video. I think I'm finally ready to kind of sit down and talk a little bit in length all about it. So first things first, who is Rainer Maria Rilke? Who is he? He was born in 1875 in Prague to German-speaking parents, and he passed away in 1926 in Switzerland from leukemia. Between those years, he had a life that was full of solitude, but also full of connection, full of life, and full of writing that has changed, I think, a lot of who I am as a person, at least. There was a man who was studying at the same military academy that Rilke had left almost 15 years prior, and his name is Rilke Kappus. Kappus decides that he wants to write some poems of his own, and he starts to write, inquiring how to be a good poet. How do I be a good artist? What does that consist of? What does that look like? And so he sends off these letters to Rilke, never really expecting a reply. And without my actually having wished it, my verses came to be accompanied by a covering letter in which I revealed myself without reserve, as I have never done before or since, to another human being. Many weeks went by before an answer came. The blue-sealed communication bore the postmark of Paris. With that began my regular correspondence with Rainer Maria Rilke, which lasted until 1908, and then gradually trickled into nothing, since life drove me off into regions against which the poet's warm, delicate, and touching solicitude had really tried to guard me. But that is not important. The only thing of importance is the 10 letters which here follow, and where a great and unique man speaks, small men must keep silence. What follows is 10 letters from Rilke to Kappus, but as the introduction advises you, it's not so much Rilke talking to Kappus, talking to Franz, more than Rilke talking at him and spinning out his own truth. He grapples with a lot of his philosophy, a lot of his artistic ideas that are so central in his own body of work in these 10 letters. I'm going to take you letter by letter. I will leave the timestamps below from letters 1 all the way to 10. Let's step into the first letter. This letter comes right after Franz has just sent Rilke some of his own verses, his own little compositions of poetry. And Rilke is advising him what exactly he should do with those pieces of poetry, and in essence he says, don't show them to anyone, don't ask anyone, ask yourself if they are good. And so kind of begins with his first piece of advice to this young poet, his own inward turning and his own looking into himself for all that he may need and all that we need in our own lives, because he thinks it's all within us. So by identifying these works of art, and especially the verses that Franz has sent Rilke, as solitary beings, he envisions art created by us who are also solitary beings. And we can only ever make products that are solitary in and of themselves, and in this way they are untouchable by criticism. So the first letter, a lot of it is about art criticism and saying who has the power to tell you whether a work of art is good or not. And Rilke's answer to that is that no one does. No individual can tell you if what you have created is good. What matters and what necessitates whether something is a good, beautiful, brilliant, sublime piece of artwork or not is whether or not that artwork has arisen out of necessity. Whether or not you felt compelled, whether you felt like you had to make it, whether it felt like your life would be incomplete without it. And so ultimately the burgeoning need for that piece of art to get out into the world is what determines whether it is any good or not. You are looking outwards, and of all things, that is what you must now not do. Nobody can advise and help you. Nobody. There is only one single means. Go inside yourself. Discover the motive that bids you write. Examine whether it sends its roots down to the deepest places of your heart. Confess to yourself whether you would have to die if writing were denied you. Ask yourself, in the quietest hour of your night, must I write? The second letter is sent from Viareggio near Pisa, Italia, on April 5th, 1903. So from the first letter where he talks a little bit about solitude, letter 2 is also a short meditation on the importance of it in art and, unfortunately, the ultimate, inescapable nature of it in our own lives. He says, fundamentally and precisely in the deepest and most important things, we are unspeakably alone. The second letter also gives a little bit of a sneak peek into books that Rilke himself finds indispensable, and a little bit of calling upon whoever the artist may be to look for inspiration and to live among books that you love before you try to start writing anything of your own. Live for a while in these books. Learn from them what seems to you worth learning, but above all, love them. Your love will be repaid 1,000,000-fold, and whatever your life may become will run through the texture of your growing as one of the most important threads among all the threads of your experiences, disappointments, and joys. Letters to a Young Poet, as I see it throughout the course of the 10 letters, we start to unfold more and more away from what Rilke kind of disguises in his letters as his advice to Kappus, and more kind of on this gradient gears towards his universal ideas, his philosophies, and what he himself wants to accomplish as a writer. So in the third letter, which is also from Viareggio, April 23rd, 1903, he uses art criticism as a springboard to talk about more universal human themes like love. So because Rilke has already identified works of art as being of an infinite solitariness, and art criticism cannot apprehend them, cannot hold them, cannot explain them, he asks what can, and his answer is love. Only love can apprehend and hold them and can be just towards them. So this attitude towards his solitary beings, which are works of art, is the same attitude that he wants to advise everyone to have in their own heart for their own solitude, which is all we'll ever really possess, is our aloneness. And he wants that same feeling of love and appreciation and of understanding your solitude to be only solvable through your love of it. Letter 4 talks so much about nature and how we should use nature as the blueprint for so much of our lives, whether that's artistic or in the way that we form and are in relationships. He wants to start with the simplicity and the patience of nature as the plan for the growing, the forming, and the creation of art, and as an inspiration. Many times over in this book, he turns to nature again as example in realms of love of every kind, as well as the example of elements of the sexual, in that he wants what he perceives in nature, and that is transparency, honesty, passion, and acceptance, and also a being that is an existence of everyone, of an individual, where being is the only goal of that existence. Your only goal as a human is to be alive and feel. You are so young, you have not even begun, and I would like to beg you, dear sir, as well as I can, to have patience with everything that is unsolved in your heart, and to try to cherish the questions themselves, like closed rooms, and like books written in a very strange tongue. Do not search now for the answers which cannot be given you, because you could not live them. It is a matter of living everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, one distant day live right into the answer. What's so brilliant about this one is that he's now built up Kappus and built up his reader to this acceptance of art as it is, a reliance on it as a solitary creation, and only love is something that can understand it or appreciate it. And now he transfers this feeling and this perception and this world that he's created around a work of art, and he transfers all of these feelings and premonitions and phenomena to the work of a human being and how to love them and how to be in a relationship with one, especially yourself. Remember that all beauty in animals and plants is a quiet, enduring form of love and longing, and see the animal, as you see the plant, patiently and willingly uniting and propagating itself and growing. And then he finishes this letter with another idea that he'll come up and bounce back around later, and which is one of the ones that I just love so much in Rilke, and that is his idea and his vehement proposition and celebration that the sexes are so much more akin than we suppose. He is so weary and so tired of the distinguishing features and also of the traditions that have built up, really harmful ones, between man and women. Perhaps the sexes are more akin than we suppose, and the great renewal of the world will perhaps consist in this, that man and woman, freed from all false feelings and perversions, will seek each other not as opposites, but as brother and sister, as neighbors, and will unite as human beings. Letter 5 is sent from Rome on October 29th, 1903, and most of this letter is just about the beauty of Rome, where he is staying, but also he works a little bit into it, the tradition of things that are past and the ancients and things that he's seeing around him. He does conclude that there is much beauty here, because there is much beauty everywhere. I'm going to call letter 6, I think, the mind your own business letter, because this is the one that goes very deep into solitude proper. He says, don't go outward, always go inward. There is such a huge journey, endless tunnels to take within yourself, endless rides and quests and paths that you can find within your own being, within your own mind, and that should be able to fuel everything you need and everything you want in your own life, especially as a creator. He talks about the dignity and the disguise of adulthood, and he longs for a return to childhood, a time when you are inevitably alone. You are separated from this world of grown-ups. They don't let you in, they don't tell you the truth, and so a child is someone who is infinitely alone in their own world, but they also know intimately how to be themselves. They're not dressing themselves up with any false airs or any affectations and anything, and so it's this kind of pure state of being, which Rilke so advocates for. He talks to Kappus, who at this point is feeling, I think, a little bit weary. He's not loving his vocation, and so Rilke kind of starts to talk about if you hate your job, if you are dissatisfied with your life, if you find your relationships stale, there is a constant, there's one outside and there's one inside, and there's a little bit of both in both, and that is nature, and that is solitude, your own self. Only the individual who is solitary is brought like a thing under the deep laws, and when a man steps out into the morning that is just beginning, or looks out into the evening that is full of happenings, and when he feels what is coming to pass there, then all rank drops from him as from a dead man, although he is standing in the midst of sheer life. The nights are still there, and the winds that go through the trees and over many lands, among things and with the animals, everything is still full of happening in which you may take a part. Letter 7 is one of my favorites. This one's also from Rome, May 14th, 1904. This one is all about relationships, not just romantic relationships or familial relationships, but also the relationship of the sexes. And Rilke efficiently, I think by the end of this letter, just breaks that down so beautifully. He asks and he advises Kappus on how can you have a good relationship with someone else. And the first way and the first thing you have to recognize is that there is solitude in you, and that solitude must recognize the solitude in the other, in whoever you're speaking to, in whoever you are trying to love. He says to love is also good, for love is difficult. Fondness between human beings. That is perhaps the most difficult task that is set to us, the ultimate thing, the final trial and test, the work for which all other work is only preparation. The second thing he talks about in relationships is that it's so important to maintain that solitude in your individuality. A relationship shouldn't be two people becoming one. It should still be a unique set apart of two people who respect and look over and guard each other's solitude. And far from defining relationships as this act of vanishing into each other, which he so reproaches, he thinks that it is not an act of losing or erasing or vanishing the self like a magic trick by uniting with another person and by going about living your life with them, but rather it is an act of maturing. The person you love should help you realize yourself more clearly, even define the solitude that you thought you knew so well, and also being in a relationship, he says, makes you become a world unto yourself and a whole other world for the sake of another person. But at the time that he's writing this, we have to remember that it's 1904. And so he says that this is an extremely difficult task to bring about, this uniting in equality and being able to be two clearly defined silhouettes in one relationship. And he advises Kappus on what is going to bring this about. What can bring about this relationship between two people that he so wants. In this really beautiful paragraph, he talks about equality and what would happen if women can move from being marked or held to a standard of men in their behavior and their professions, not recognized as an antithesis or a counterpart or the opposite of man, but something significant in herself. One day the girl will be here, and the woman whose name will no longer signify merely the opposite of masculinity, but something in itself, something which makes us think of no complement or limitation, but only of life and existence. Letter 8 then moves into another important topic that he talks about, and at this point, we've not moved totally away from art and art criticism, but mostly into humanity. Rilke is my favorite speaker about pain, sorrow, and suffering and death. So for Rilke, fear and suffering and death is something you have to accept and needs to be more friend than foe. But then he also asks the important question, well, how are you supposed to go around living in the world when you know these things are going to happen to you? And so I will recite to you my favorite quote, and I think one of the ones that changed my life the most. This is my favorite letter. Letter 8 is my favorite letter of this collection, and it's Rilke telling you how to live. He says, fear of the inexplicable has not only impoverished the relationship of one human being to another, as if it were lifted up from the riverbed of infinite possibilities and placed on a fallow spot on the bank, to which nothing happens. For if we think of this existence of the individual as a larger or smaller room, it becomes clear that most people get to know only one corner of their room, a window seat, a strip of floor which they pace up and down. In that way they have a certain security. And yet how much more human is that insecurity, so fraught with danger, which compels the prisoners in Poe's tales to grope for the shapes of their ghastly prisons and not to remain unaware of the unspeakable horrors of their dwelling. But we are not prisoners. No traps or snares are set about us, and there is nothing in life which should intimidate or worry us. For we are set down as in the element to which we best correspond, and over and above this we have, through thousands of years of accommodation, become so like this life, that when we hold still, we are, through a happy mimicry, scarcely to be distinguished from all that surrounds us. We have no reason to mistrust our world, for it is not against us. Has it terrors? There are terrors. If it has abysses, those abysses belong to us. Perhaps everything terrible is in its deepest being something helpless that wants help from us. Letter 9 is set from Jonsered, Sweden, November 4th, 1904. This is the letter that says, be nice to yourself, take care of yourself, take care of your solitude, cultivate it, and use it. It advises you to live every feeling, every moment, and use it for your art. And finally, letter 10 is back in Paris, the second day of Christmas, 1908. This letter confirms and reaffirms and kind of ends where he begins when he says that there's no right way of living, and art is living. He says art too is only a way of living, and you can be close to it, and more close to it, than lots of professions which, while they make show of a relatedness to art, in practice deny and attack the existence of all art, as for instance the whole of journalism does, and almost all criticism, and 3/4 of what calls itself and likes to be called literature. So these letters are just affirmations and joy at life, but also a deep recognition of sorrow, death, despair, relationships, the ridiculous constraints that we've set up for ourselves as human beings, and it just provides, I think, such a wonderful place to live life. This book has done so much for me throughout so many years, and I'm so thankful for it. And so that is a very quick little tour through all 10 letters of Letters to a Young Poet. I would highly, highly recommend picking this book up, no matter where you are in life, because this book is about life, and there's no right or wrong way to live, just as there's no right or wrong way to create art. That is a little bit of Rilke. I also think this is a great place to start. I do have a whole video about Rilke and where to start and where kind of to read his work, so I will link that up above as well. But thank you so much for watching, and I guess I will just leave you with a few words from him.